Hi, everybody. Welcome to another Test and Learn community conversation. It's been a while. It's been about 6 weeks, more than our normal gap, thanks to the holidays and all that. So Happy New Year, everyone. And figured we'd kick off the new year in style by taking a look back using the State of the Industry report by CXL Institute, and then also thinking about setting goals for the programs that we run or support using PRWD's maturity model with Ben LeVay. So thanks, guys. I really appreciate you being here. Real quick, I'd like to introduce you both. So those of you who don't know, Ben is the research director at CXL Institute. He's a conversion research specialist, and he combines academic and statistics training with customer experience and UX knowledge to help scope and run conversion research programs around the world. He's also, of course, the co-author of the State of the Industry report, although you tell me that there's a big group that's a part of that. So thank you, Ben, for being here. And Paul is the founder and CEO of PRWD. He's worked in UX and CRO since 2002, worked with brands ranging from pioneering AI companies through global leading sportswear, drinks, and retail brands. And he launched the maturity model that we're going to talk about today in 2016. There is a link to the content that both of these gentlemen have helped produce in the TLC calls and in the advanced testing channels on the TLC Slack, so I encourage you to check them out. And if anybody has any specific questions, both Paul and Ben are happy to answer after the call. So let's get started. Welcome, guys. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Thank you, Kelly.
Absolutely. And you're both new to the TLC, so welcome to the TLC as well. I'd like to start by just talking about the history of both reports. Like, how did they come into being? What were their impetus? And how have they changed over time? And I'll just start with you, Ben.
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. Pleasure to be here. And with the history of the report, this is our third year to do it, and the first year coincided with the beginning of the CXL Institute. So many of you are probably familiar with the Institute, online training. Or kind of all things CRO, digital analytics, growth marketing, things like that. And so initially, it was sort of an effort by us to do a little customer research on our own, just to get a lay of the land. CXL did have and still has, of course, a very large readership of the blog. When we started to create that product, the CXL Institute, we wanted to sort of create a bit of a benchmark of the struggles, the profile of an optimizer, and that way that when we were producing content and training products, we could use this data, this effectively customer research data, to help inform that. And so it's got some dual purposes. It allows us to speak with our audience, to a little bit give back and to, provide some fun statistics on that CRO, that optimizer profile.
Yep.
But then for us, it kind of feeds back onto our own products and our own thinking of the trends and the patterns of what we're most interested in is the struggles of optimizers. Where are they articulating some of the issues that they're having, and how is that? This is being our third year, we're starting to think about trends and things like that within industries. So,
as we talked about already, 3 data points, and now you have a trend.
Exactly.
Yay! How about you, Paul?
So the maturity model first got considered in 2013. So it's coming up to like 5-6 years ago now. And we were working with companies. They were bringing us in to be their CRO agency. So they were bringing us in for our kind of people skills, our methodology. But as we started working with companies, there was varying levels of understanding and awareness within the company of conversion optimization and customer focus. And we were, I suppose in some ways, we're having some challenges with some companies where that culturally and strategically as a business, conversion optimization was an insignificant, irrelevant part of the business. The business wasn't customer focused, it was very opinion led. And we found some of our partnerships with clients quite challenging because we weren't really brought in to change the culture. We were brought in to run a program. But if the senior decision makers don't really get it or don't buy into it, then they don't really care about it. They might not continue investing. So we were thinking of a way of, well, how can, knowing that we're having to try and influence business culture and the kind of mindset of decision makers, how can we kind of get a measure on that? Because it's not a measurement from GA. This is a measurement of the business and how the business is structured and how culturally it is. So I attended a keynote talk by Tim Ash at SiteTuners back in 2013, and he talked about their maturity model. And I watched this presentation and I immediately thought, that's the kind of thing we need. We need a maturity model where we can assess businesses, understand where they are, where the challenges are, where can we fit into that. And I suppose culturally, whether or not the company is going to be easy to work with or incredibly hard to work with, and with the decision makers, and are they product led or are they customer led or somewhere in between. So we developed our first maturity model, 2013-14. It had 4 pillars, which is the same 4 pillars today. But within the 4 pillars, there was a total of 49 assessment points. And we started to audit businesses. So we'd go in, we'd do like a piece of consultancy and audit a company. And it worked well, but it was so granular, we kind of realized over the next year or two that we were trying to ask too many questions. Some questions were only relevant for big companies, and if you've got a smaller company, it's going to be irrelevant. So then you can't have parity between a big company and a little company, for instance. So over the last 3 years, we've refined the model down to the version it has been for about the last 18 months, and there's 21 assessment points across the 4 pillars. And the intention is that the model is to be as applicable to as many businesses as possible. So as long as they're testing to some degree, whether it's just 1 test a month, you don't need to be it's not a measurement of how many tests you do. But as long as a company is starting to do A/B testing, then the maturity model and the audit can be done for that company, and you can benchmark yourself. So that's the history of it. And the vision for the model is for it to help standardize and help improve standards of companies and agencies around the whole world, which is a lofty ambition and a big vision, but it's something that I'm deeply passionate about, which is why we make it all freely, publicly available to use by anyone without any form of lead generation activity behind it. So
also a great way to collect more data, right?
Yeah, for the benchmarking. So, yeah, benchmarking data, it has weight and power behind it, because when a company sees how they're rated versus other companies in their sector, there's more weight and gravitas behind the insights. So that's kind of the path and direction that we're on.
Awesome. So you both sort of referenced it, and I think it's an interesting side effect of both the model and the report, is that the people who participate in it actually also get some education about maybe things that they should be doing or should be thinking about, or what maturity really looks like, or what others are doing that maybe the organization didn't recognize. Ben, I noticed one of the top struggles mentioned in the 2018 State of the Industry report was around process.
Yeah.
And I know that it's a continuing struggle for us and our clients with helping them focus on process, because nobody wants to focus on process. It's not sexy. It's not fun. And Paul, you mentioned, interestingly, strategy and culture. So I'm curious about the differences here. So maybe we'll start with you, Ben. What are you hearing about process? And then Paul, if you could share a little bit about strategy and culture.
Yeah.
So I love the process topic. I like to geek out on
There's something wrong with you. No, I'm just kidding.
We get, of course, a lot of companies contacting us looking for silver bullets and looking for solutions, and we have to say that we don't do solutions. We do methodology. We do a process,
Yep.
And so. I think people think of it, A/B testing or experimentation generally as something that they can come in and do for a few months and then sell their business for a lot of money or something like this. And that's fine to look at it that way. But really, the process helps to identify customer problems, and A/B testing is just there to test to see what solution is the best to solve that customer problem. And the only way to think about customer problems and to put them in context is to have that process. So where you mentioned the report and the model, they help optimizers they educate them. I think that if you if you report that you have a problem with process, or you can characterize your tech stack, and if you see this list of questions that the maturity model provides, if you see the survey, the report results, it allows you to have the context of where your questions lie in a broader set of questions and a broader set of how a program, or what questions a program should be asking.
Right.
So that's a bit of a ramble on what I think about.
Sure. Paul, how about you? What are you seeing in culture and strategy? And was that just in the beginning, or is that consistent since you started?
So, well, I'd say first of all, we're going back to the original idea and building a model and building the pillars, what pillars there would be. I felt the first model that we saw that I mentioned before we created ours, there was a lack of reference to strategy and culture of the business. So it was a lot about people, the skills, the tools, the process. And we were knowing from experience how influential the culture is. And, is there someone at the C-suite that understands customer experience and the importance of listening to your customers? So that's why there was a pillar created in itself. So of the four pillars, the strategy and culture pillar looks at a business overall, the culture, the mindset, how they make decisions, again, what level of seniority does customer experience lead up to? Is it just manager, director, C-suite, or ownership? So that was critical for us to separate out process and methodology, which in the model is looking at things like how hypotheses are developed, the design process that you go through, the QA process, how you analyze tests and how you report on tests. Where the culture is about the mindset. And if I'm being absolutely frank about it, we published a book 4 years ago where Pep from CXL contributed to, along with other industry thought leaders. And the question posed to everyone was, what in all your experience is holding companies back from growing through optimization at the moment? And this is 4 years ago, this book. And Pep talked about the proliferation of bullshit content and the fact that there's so much going on, and you look at the CRO hashtag on Twitter and you're going to find hacks, tips, cheats, etc. So this was 4 years ago, and we're still there today. And obviously CXL as an institute and as a content hub is trying to book the trend and to provide a credible source of the right insight and recommendations. But also what I talked about was this is 4 years ago, companies are talking the talk about being customer-centric and just anywhere near being truly customer-centric. Genuinely, the book, with these two comments as well as 15 other contributors from everyone from Andre Morris to Pep and Jeffrey Eisenberg, so industry thought leaders, genuinely the book could have been published today. And this isn't just trying to make it up.
Not a lot has changed.
In 4 years, no, because you're trying to change the culture and the mindset of decision makers that have just done things the way they have for many, many years. So, it's still a really big challenge. There's a long way to go.
So, Paul, a quick question, and I hope, Kelly, you don't mind me interjecting.
Always.
But a quick question to pivot on that last point, Paul. I know that you're working with the maturity model to sort of broaden the reach of it and get it out there into more hands. To try to shift or turn the ship a little bit with regards to how agencies, companies generally are looking at CRO. Maybe you can touch on our conversations that we've had with regards to your plans with that CRO maturity model and getting it out there as more of an industry standard.
Yeah, absolutely. So sometimes what we get asked about, or with having a model and then having an online audit where you go on, you put your details in, you assess your business, and then you can get your maturity scores. Probably one of the first questions we get asked is kind of skepticism around, this is just lead generation. You're just doing it to capture information, and then you're going to follow up with people. You're going to try and get clients through that. When I then say to people that in all the years that the audit has been live, for about 2.5 years, we have never once contacted any company that's audited their business. This is zero about lead generation. This is a genuine attempt to bring something into the industry that's publicly available to any company around the world, that within 15-20 minutes they can audit their business. They can, as Ben mentioned, it's asking the important questions that the company needs to look at, and it's helping people internally to demonstrate to the superiors this is why we need dedicated data resource, or this is why we need UX designers, or this is why we need to improve GA. So it's giving people a framework to be able to have these internal discussions. So the intention of the model and the vision for it to become the industry standard, which is again is a lofty ambition, is to debrand it. So it's not PRWD's maturity model. It's the conversion optimization maturity model. It's endorsed by CXL potentially, and we collaborate as this, getting this kind of shared. So we're in the process at the moment of speaking to individuals, consultants, thought leaders, big agencies around partnering behind this and to put their name behind it. And I can't help but want to raise standards across the whole industry. I'm not sure what personally drives me for that, but
it makes our jobs easier, right? If you're not having to always re-explain the same concepts because there's a shared understanding of what right looks like, which I don't think exists today, at least not in the conversations that I have.
I think that definitely that when you actually start to look at the individual points, there's points specifically around, so for instance, effective experiments as a tool where you can put all your test ideas in and your hypothesis and your learnings, and you get access. You've got like company-wide access to test results. There's a particular point in the model which is asking that question: how do you share your test results, from no sharing through to company-wide access? So that point in particular is helping a company like Effective Experiments, because it's posing the question and it's recommending you have something like that. It's also recommending that you do research, and CXL advocate research, which any good optimization program should be driven from research. It recommends enhancing your GA. So for data analysts out there, it's giving you credence behind why GA should be better configured. So this can help agencies. It can help tool providers, because it's providing the credibility behind things that need to be looked at. So there is a much broader impact. And I'll just share one quick story. An agency that we compete with in the UK on some of the projects, some of the optimization programs, they've recently used the model with one of their clients who was coming to an end of a contract. So it was like an end of a 2-year retainer, and the client was planning to leave and just do it themselves. So this agency said, well, could we audit your business using an independent audit, which was a maturity model, to help highlight areas where you still need us? And they did the audit. The company realized they still needed the agency, and the agency then got a new 12-month contract. But it was focused on different areas because it highlighted which areas were weak. So we have no idea who that company is. We don't get any commission. We didn't contact anyone. But the model has helped an agency that we compete with get another 12-month contract. So
certainly a compelling story for the agencies on the phone.
Yeah, genuinely, it's there to be used, and to not worry that we're trying to harvest information to then contact people and say, "Oh, do you want to work with PRWD?" It's zero relevance to that.
So I want to flip back again to the strategy versus or the verticals versus the process or technology, people, skills, all that. And I'm really curious because what are the similarities? Like when you look at, because you have the wealth of everybody who's taken the maturity assessment, is there a common theme, or is the weak area completely different depending on the company, or is it different based on industry? Does it match, like when you look at the state of the industry report, does it match what you're seeing in your maturity assessments?
So I think an area where we're seeing similarities is in the state of the industry report. There's more people coming into the industry. There's you look at the people that have had a few years' experience. So there's more and more people coming into the industry working in conversion jobs, and the people and skills pillar is I suppose it's a bit healthier than it was maybe a year or two ago, because there are more roles being created in conversion optimization, whether it's for data research, strategy, and then like UX design. So you can tell that there's more resources going into it, but process and methodology, there's not really much change going on there. And
isn't that interesting? So technology continues to grow, people's and skill sets grow, yet if the struggles that you're seeing, Ben, the number one struggle based on the 2018 report continues to be process. What was it in 2017? What was it in 2016?
Well,
We didn't ask that question, right?
no, we didn't. Not the open-ended version.
Where's my trend, Ben? Come on.
I will say we did kind of dig in a little bit by industry of where they're putting efforts and how many per industry, like e-commerce or lead gen.
Mm-hmm.
How are they documenting? Do they have a dedicated research program? Things like that. We've got some questions that speak to process, and so where we can get some sort of vectors of understanding of how e-commerce companies within the respondents of the survey, how healthy they are with the process compared to lead gen and things like that. And we do see consistent trends there where e-commerce is a little ahead of the curve. I think this is a bit of a consequence of just e-commerce. More e-commerce companies are running faster, and they have been running with CRO programs. They have the data, they have the data and the resources to do that. Compared to lead gen, for example, there's just more e-commerce, there's more companies out there. So we get some understandings there of where some of the weak points are. And for example, those SaaS companies are very far behind both lead gen and e-commerce companies with regards to process, but are way ahead in terms of how much they're paying optimizers. And that's always a fun tidbit. So yeah, I think the open-ended question that we added in 2018 to allow the respondents to sort of list their top struggles. This was
to
great.
Rant.
Great question.
Gave them a chance to rant.
Yes, it did.
Everybody needs that.
Yeah, we're a huge fan of open-ended questions with gathering qualitative data, and it takes a bit to process, but there's it's always helpful to get that type of information.
So we have a question in the Zoom chat, and it's real close to what I was about to ask, so that works out perfectly. Do either of you know of any studies that have been done which provide the results of process optimization, or is it a safe assumption that it will automatically improve results? Or to frame that in a slightly different way, I know, Paul, you shared, I think it was you, the link between program maturity and impact.
Yeah, so there's a case study, a particular business case study that we did.
Does it talk about process at all, or is it just in general overall program maturity?
So it was overall, but then within the slides in the case study, there's a kind of side-by-side comparison of how the process and methodology assessment rating matured in 12 months. But it was the overall effectiveness of across the four pillars that had helped to have a significant commercial impact. So I'll find the case. I think I'll find the case study a second, and I'll post it on the Slack. Yeah.
Yeah, and if you send it to me, I'll also send it out with the notes for those who aren't on the Slack.
Yeah, I'll do that in a second.
And then before I get to Tim Wilson's question, he just posted in the Slack as well, but I'm sorry, in the Zoom chat. Tim, why aren't you using the Slack? But anyway, Ben or Paul, I don't know if either one of you can answer this, but have you seen a correlation between any of the things that you've evaluated for current status with the state of the industry or maturity that correlate more strongly with impact? Like if you were going to focus on one area, let's say you were level across the board, you were in your people, your process, your technology, whatever, what one area should a company focus to make improvements if they want to improve the impact of their program?
I think I think it's a bit of a stretch to take the data from the report and draw a straight line to a conclusion there. In my opinion, I think it would be people. From an agency perspective and working with many clients, process is great, but if you don't have a champion on the client side that's willing to take that process and push it forward, a champion that has the confidence of a broader team on the client side, then it doesn't go far. You can have a process but not go far because you don't have someone that gets the resources to push that program forward. So my opinion is that it's on the people side. Paul?
I would say the strategy. So if a company was at, say, 50% across the 4 pillars, for instance, I would say the strategy and culture, because what we find there is that if, for instance, and we've seen this happen, it's not something we can directly impact, but we've seen companies that it's taken a change of ownership and a change of CEO at that company to change the whole mindset of the company, from one which was product-led to one that becomes customer-led. And then that has a full kind of waterfall effect down through the company, because the chief executive has worked previously maybe at a company that's been truly customer-centric. So so then you can imagine all the things that come off the back of it. There's more money invested, there's more plans, there's more strategies, they're willing to build a team up, they're willing to invest more in the right technology. So I would say, yeah, if everything's equal, then focusing on the cultural elements and the strategic elements can have the biggest positive impact across the other pillars. It helps fuel the other pillars.
Yep. Tim's question that in the Zoom chat it's not really a question, but he says, I'm envisioning an A/B test of process optimization where half of the tests that are run are identified and managed through an optimized process, and the other half are Wild West. Ironically, Tim, and I don't think we've discussed this, we're actually accidentally doing that with one of our clients right now. So back to you with the results as soon as we have them, just because they have 2 teams running tests and one doesn't use a process and the other does. So maybe I'll actually be able to answer that question myself soon.
Okay.
Becca asks a question on the TLC Slack for you, Ben. She says, you mentioned that people process is weaker on the SaaS side versus the investment financially. Can you expand on the reasons behind that?
Oh, don't have reasons. This is the responses. So in terms of the average salary for SaaS, I randomly have the statistic that there are 47 respondents in that SaaS group that listed an average salary, and it was really high. So I don't know the reason behind that average salary. And then in terms of, there's a set of questions that speak to process in terms of archiving tests. How often do you meet with others on your team to discuss CRO? Do you have a formal, research process? Questions like this, taken as a whole, the answers on that question were weakest with that SaaS group. So though can't connect the dots in terms of reasoning there. And I will say a bit of a caveat with this report, to circle back to the background of it. There's 26 questions in the survey. We sent it out to 700 people, and so when we start to slice and dice it, it's by no means. It starts to get a bit faulty, and the conclusions there are not scientific, statistically sound by any means.
That's fair.
Not looking to get p-values of the difference between what SaaS pays versus what e-commerce pays optimizers. It's just a way to get a read and a feel from our community and where things are. And then as we start to stack up year after year, we looking for some measurable, not statistically measurable, but sort of shifts in how people are answering things.
Right. Matt asks on the Zoom chat, and if this is Matt Gershoff again, come on, use the TLC Slack. He has a 2-parter. Number 1, should we think of CRO process as a form of technical debt? So perhaps in some low-scale cases, a lack of process is okay. And then part 2, with regards to culture, is there, or if not, should there be something about risk adversity of corporate culture?
Yeah, I'll take the second part first of all. So yeah, 100% around culture and around that kind of risk adversity. So within the strategy and culture pillar, there's a few points, but specifically the business mindset. If people have got access to the report now, if you go to the business mindset, which is on page 14, So this has a 5-scale maturity, as all the different points do, and this starts very much from beginner level, is where a company does the things they've always have done, very low risk, and they just play the safe option. If you jump to the top of the maturity at transformative level, this is a business that has a true growth mindset, is anti-fragile, is willing to take risks, is willing to kind of do something now.
Wait. Did you say anti-fragile?
Yeah.
Oh my God, that's my new term. I love that. I've never heard that used that way. It's perfect.
Nassim Taleb, is that right?
That's great. I love it.
There's a really good book, Kelly, Nassim Taleb, Anti-Fragile.
Awesome.
I think that's fine.
Yeah, and then finally as well, that at that transformative level, the company decision makers, they understand and embrace unpredictability.
Yep.
And I often cite the 3 pillars of Amazon that Jeff Bezos has very openly shared over many years at many conferences that have been the cornerstone of their success. And it's customer centricity, it's inventiveness, and it's be patient. And I think so few companies are that combination of inventing new things and being patient to get the value and to get the commercial impact. Very few companies and decision makers are willing to kind of play that long game. It's nearly always about the short-term success and the short-term commercial metrics.
I think that last point that you made circles back to the first part of Matt's question with regards to companies that are smaller. They don't have the luxury of patience. And it's been a little bit since that question was read by Kelly, so I might have missed some nuances of it. But I think that, to build out a very sophisticated or elaborate process might be not the best idea for a small company that doesn't quite have the product market fit. But generally, CRO is working on, past that part, working with companies that are past that part of the growth cycle. So,
just going back to the tools and technology point a little bit around maybe some of the maturity. I think just as a broad thing across digital industry, that what I've seen from experiences working with a range of different companies is so often one of the biggest wastes of expenditure that companies make is on tools and technology that are there to kind of transform the business.
And then they don't hire the people that can get the most out of the tools.
Yeah, it's unbelievable the money that's spent versus often the budgets we might be talking about to have an optimization.
But they're typically different budgets, right? You've got a tech budget, which you never have issues with, and then a people budget, which you always have issues with. And that people budget also impacts your ability to change the culture and sometimes process. Now, if you could find a way to fund maybe process improvements with a tech budget, you could maybe make that case and at least get 2 of the pillars a little bit stronger. But we really got to focus, which actually brings us to Becca's follow-up question in the Slack. She says, if an organization is weak on the people or process side, what can be done tactically to remedy that internally?
There's a lot of options out there with regards to the tool stack these days, and this landscape is changing very quickly. We as an agency, we very much try to be tool agnostic,
right?
So we can have unbiased recommendations for our clients, and I would think that usually our recommendation in terms of what tool to use is that thinking from the client side, who is going to be that champion, who is comfortable in whatever tool that they're going to use. They need to live in these tools and live in that stack.
So are you suggesting one of the ways to remedy any lack of maturity in people or process is to make sure that you have a tool that's fit to the skill set of the people?
I think that's what I'm trying to say. Yeah, I don't know if that's a tactic per the question.
It's pretty practical.
Yeah, maybe.
If everybody's comfortable in a certain tool because you've been using it, maybe that makes more sense than trying something different if the technology isn't the weak spot.
Yeah. I can completely agree. We often speak to companies who are thinking about changing the tool set, changing their kind of experimentation platform to a bigger one, a more enterprise level one. And when you start to understand and look at how they're currently using the current platform, which might be more of an entry level one and something not as advanced, they're not even using it to anywhere near its capability, and they're scratching the surface. So it's a strange thing to encounter. So often we're saying to companies, no, you don't need to change the platform that
It's
you're
not
on.
the tool. Yeah.
It's when you need some more resources. I think particularly the process and methodology question, and I think the one on Slack around what can be done tactically to help remedy that internally on the process side. For me, user research, CXL, huge advocates of research. There's different types of research. I'm the biggest research activity that I'm an advocate of and that I often speak about, and it's often the most underutilized research technique in the world. Sounds a bit over the top, but I've not seen anything to counter that. Is speaking to customers one-to-one, is getting your target audience in a room, speaking to them, watching them, observing them, giving them the chance to share. You can do remote moderated as well, and there's obviously remote research tools, but actually speaking to your customers, and that doesn't need to cost thousands of pounds. You can do it in a very agile way, but that would be my primary kind of tip for a company to improve the process, will be to improve how you develop your hypothesis and to bring more voice of customer into that.
Yeah, I would add on the client side in terms of tactics to help improve process. Speaking to the culture, we find great success in working with optimization managers and trying to get very close to the UX research, either department or personnel, and allow the UX research to live alongside the experimentation results, and then somehow try to get this to the broader team and broader company, whether it's via kind of an internal newsletters, in-person meetings where you're periodically presenting a bit of a story arc of the results of the research and how that connects with test learnings, and how these test learnings can then touch on the way that the product is developed. If you create that story arc and present it to a broad team, whether it's like a quarterly meeting or something like that, that tends to start to get, level set, get everyone on the same page, and start to shift that culture ship into the right direction.
So that brings a question to mind for me, which is, if for both of you, if you look at the trends, so since you've had the maturity model, maybe think of single clients that have taken it multiple times, and of course it's quite easy in the state of the industry report over the last 3 years. What has changed and what has stayed the same?
In terms of the report, one of the biggest things that there's a lot that stayed the same, which is interesting because who we're sending this email out to, I think, has shifted over the last 3 years. A little
it says
bit.
A lot for the the accuracy of the responses you're getting.
It does. It's not. It's sort of a good and bad, or it's a double-edged sword a little bit. We from the it's hard to look at trends of that with that, definitely. But when things do stay the same, that's also very telling as well. So in terms of when things staying the same, the profile of the optimizer, we see some shifts in maybe a little bit in gender and salaries and things like that, but generally it's the same. Work experience, process, we still see big gaps there that are very consistent year over year. But in terms of the shifts, the budgets. This was a big shift over the last year. In the 2 previous years, we see a lot more dedicated CRO budgets as being either part of the marketing budget or a standalone line item, if that might be the case. And so that's one of my big takeaways there. And also the CRO effectiveness, we're seeing shifts of reporting of year over year. We're getting more out of our CRO programs, things like that. So,
which would make sense if they're starting to get their own budgets. But if I remember correctly, they're not necessarily getting more budget.
Correct.
They're just getting dedicated budget.
Exactly. That's a little bit of the takeaway. Yeah. No, I think, 40-50% report more budget. So a large chunk reporting more in a vector.
That's good. Just not a majority yet.
Correct.
We'll get there. How about you, Paul? What do you see as shifts in maturity?
So what we're seeing, and this is a combination of the data that we get through from companies doing the audit, but then also the companies that we speaking to, either working with or when we speak to other agencies, that there's genuinely becoming a very, like, not even just a top 1%, but I think Pet talks about, join the 0.1% of the digital industry, like, and be really at the top of your game. There's a fraction of companies that are really kind of developing on this and really kind of embracing it. They're hiring the right teams, they're getting the right tools in place, and they're becoming more customer focused. The vast majority of companies, big and small, across sectors, I'm genuinely not seeing much change. It's optimization, CRO, experimentation. It's still often seen as it's nowhere near seen as important as search engine optimization and acquisition. It's still seen as this supplementary, complementary thing that we can do, we can try. We've seen cycles of companies where they've invested in it for 12 months. Maybe the agency they've worked with hasn't been as effective and not really had a process behind it. So they've not really delivered the impact. And in the worst case scenario, we've had companies and decision makers thinking that this conversion optimization thing isn't for us, because they've had the fingers burnt. And then if you're working within that company, you're having to start the cycle again to win hearts and minds as to why we need budget for people and for the right process. So, there's genuinely, it's quite a negative outlook, I suppose I'm painting here, but it's the reality. We're speaking to companies this week, yesterday even. I had 2 conversations with 2 people who were kind of senior levels within companies, like senior manager, director level. And both of them know how much and how valuable it is to become more customer focused, and they want to do research. And right now, they just can't get the buy-in to do it. So there's a lot of people out in the industry that kind of know the right things to do, but they're hamstrung by the lack of people around them. They've got the day job to do, and then they're having to do some A/B testing on the side, or the tool isn't fit for purpose, or the business is just focusing on a big re-platform or a big migration. And that's where all the energy goes. So, optimization is still, for the top percentile, is, there's some great successes, your case studies, what you see at the big conferences and things like that. But to put it into perspective, this is the very, very cream of the crop. The rest, there's still a long way to go.
Do you think that we're a bit biased in who we talk to, the 3 of us being agency focused?
I suppose potentially, yeah. So when we think of the maturity audit and the benchmarking scores, this is for companies that are aware of it, that have seen it on Twitter, LinkedIn, or wherever.
There are also companies who need support from agencies.
Yeah, that's what my thinking is that we don't talk to the companies that don't need support from agencies. So
still a long way to go, but. There's the right kind of things in place, and I truly admire the CXL Institute and the kind of vision and mission behind that, because it's obviously creating a destination of truly credible content rather than searching online for like the top 10 ways to improve XYZ.
And then you find 5 blogs that all say something totally different with questionable foundation in their recommendations. It's nice to have a single source. Gershoff just shared a thought in the TLC Slack. There seems to be an implicit assumption here that the greater investment in people, tools, whatever, if done wisely, will have returns. However, I wonder if, given a certain corporate culture, a risk-adverse one specifically, or punitive incentives, with inflexible structures, the outcome of an audit should be maybe to scale back or even eliminate CRO until the larger environment changes to make it more likely to be of value. It's interesting. Interesting.
I immediately, when I'm reading that there, I immediately think and refer back to what I mentioned earlier around, to look at the 4 pillars and which would you focus on. If everything was 50-50-50, something like that, 50%, strategy and culture would be the one. So that does support what Matt's kind of suggesting there, that until you've got the right people in place, the right seniority of influence in CX and optimization, and the mindset of the company has shifted more to kind of this experimentation-led kind of try new things and, risk, like moving away from risk averse. Yeah, absolutely. That would be, for some businesses, the right path to take, because once that's in place, once a company is truly more customer centric, as I share on various things, that transcends the whole company. Whether or not you're doing A/B testing, being customer centric that's how you can operate as a business. So yeah, that's a core fundamental.
Is there a bit of a chicken and the egg issue though? Because to change corporate habits, and I'm not saying if there's rigidity that's preventing an A/B testing program, there's still experimentation. There's still, as you say, Paul, a customer-centric mindset. But don't you need people there to initiate changes of corporate habits to shift that culture?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I'm speaking at an event in a few weeks in Dublin, and the title of the talk is moving from talking the talk to walking the walk, becoming customer centric. And what I'm going to be sharing with the audience is specifically around what they can do in their positions. So these are people within companies, within agencies, at various levels of seniority that are probably in that challenging position of needing to influence the stakeholders and trying to influence culture, as you're saying there. So I'm sharing with them the way in which we've done that with various companies, including Red Bull and Games Workshop in the last few years, where it's through the one-to-one research that I mentioned, conducting that, getting that genuine qualitative insight, then having video clips of the sessions, of like short video clips of people saying something or comparing it to a competitor, and then these video clips being evidence that's presented to stakeholders to make them start to think differently and to make them realise that their view of their digital experience isn't the reality of the customer. So that's kind of, I suppose that's more ground up influence onto the decision makers. So yeah, I think to change, like for every company to have a change of CEO before anything happens that's not like a sustainable strategy. So often, I suppose it needs to come from within. So, and there are ways of where we help companies do that and where companies can do it themselves.
Yeah, when you mentioned the change of CEO, I just read The Power of Habit. I forget the author, and it speaks of corporations changing the way that they operate slowly, and generally, it usually comes from a crisis situation, like losing a CEO or a massive issue. And I think it was the quote in there from Ron Emanuel during the 2008 financial crisis: "Never let a good crisis go to waste."
Great quote.
A change of CEO, a massive disruption, personnel change. These are good inflection points to try and weasel in new processes and new corporate habits. So there's a bit of a tactic for maybe for people to think about.
So I have a challenge to the idea that you have to shift the culture first. 90% agreed with you and aligned, because if the culture's not there, you won't be able to go very far. Results won't be believed. You won't be able to accomplish as much. But for an organization that didn't have a CRO program in the first place, or a one in its infancy, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit out there. And if you have a solid technology, process, and people to run them in place, then you can almost shift the culture by proving out the potential of a solid CRO program.
Guerilla CRO.
Yeah.
It starts with the champion, and that's you need to have someone there that can chip away. And Paul, you mentioned sitting down with customers, doing that base level of UX research, talking with customers, presenting videos to that C-suite to make them shift and maybe try to be a little bit more customer centric. It's that type of small effort from a single person that starts that culture shift. So I think starting the people as a foundation to introduce the process. Success is led.
Yeah, I'd recommend as well. kind of for a company maybe at the early stage of bringing in optimization and wanting to make that have a real positive impact, is ensuring that you have tools in place, such like very cost-effective tools such as Hotjar, that give you session recordings. You can ask key questions at key stages of the journey, but you're basically providing your customers with a feedback mechanism. And so as long as you are using and acting on the feedback, and whether it's a JDI change, maybe because you can't test because you've not got the traffic to test, but at least if you're starting to make customer informed changes and improvements, that's starting to kind of build a bit of, I suppose, a bit of the right momentum.
You're not making changes for change's sake. You're making changes because your customers are telling you they want those changes.
Yeah, and then another one. Often there's a disconnect between the digital e-com teams and customer services. If there is a customer service team, bridging that gap and genuinely speaking to the people on the front line that are speaking to customers can have a wealth of insights and opportunities in that. So there's ways of doing this that you don't need to be running lots of tests a month in order to be a mature business. You can run one test a month and have a really good process and a really good customer feedback loop in place.
And learn a lot and make a lot of impact from that one test. Yeah. So we have about 4 minutes left, and I wanted to ask a question of both of you around the techniques that you've seen or read about or heard about or whatever that have the most impact on improving a CRO program. And you can focus on any of the pillars or whatever, whether it's culture, strategy, whatever. I'm just real curious, because I know everybody on the phone wants practical, what am I going to go focus on? What are the techniques that are going to have the biggest impact on my program being able to have an impact?
On my side, I'm blown away at how many, and again, biased by who's contacting us, but sure. Even large companies that come in and don't have a prioritization process in place. So it seems a no-brainer, but
the hippo-driven prioritization.
Yeah. So the reasons that companies are contacting agencies is because they need help with focus and context. They have 1,000 things to do, and they need an outside, clear-eyed perspective on where they should focus. A prioritization framework is an obvious hub of where that should go. And at the same time, very connected to this is test bandwidth calculation. Where should they run tests? How many can they run? Within a 30-minute GA analysis with theoretically a good understanding of KPIs, you can identify with great granularity how many tests per year you should be running and what type of tests that you can run, et cetera. And that then informs that prioritization framework. So a couple points there.
Right.
Yeah, I would recommend on this to bring in a hypothesis structure. So often, and it ties in with prioritization as well, but so many companies just don't really have a structure behind the things that they're going to test. So having, in its simplest terms, what have we observed or what have we seen through data, through research, through Hotjar, whatever it might be. Based on these observations, we expect that by making these changes, we'll have this effect on this customers, and we're going to measure it by these metrics. So having, and there's information on this on the CXL blog in terms of hypothesis structures, but bringing in a hypothesis structure that is then guiding anyone that's coming up with these ideas and opinions and things like that. It's forcing them to think about the actual why behind the test, and it's not good enough to say I think it could be better, so we'll do this. So it's getting a hypothesis structure in place that changes need to fit within to start giving the ideas some credibility.
Yeah, one of my favorite elements of any prioritization framework is strength of evidence. So did you have evidence? That's your just yes, no, and if not, go away. But if you do, how strong is that evidence? And you give different weightings to different types of evidence. So ironically, making sure that you've got solid evidence from great sources is what you're mentioning, Paul, and Ben. You're saying prioritization is one of the big problems. To me, they're combined. They're both super important and drive improved experimentation, which of course leads to greater impact. So
Yeah.
I want to thank you both for being here. You've been excellent panelists. I hope you come back again many times. I feel like we only scratched the surface of
Mhm.
all of the content that you both have to share and your expertise. There's follow-up questions and whatnot on the TLC calls if you guys get a chance to head over there and check that out. And always, as always, everyone join the conversation on the Slack and elsewhere. I will save this recording and send out the notes with the link to it as well as links to all the different pieces of content that were mentioned today. And I really appreciate everybody. Don't forget our next conversation is February 22nd, I believe. And we'll be talking about non-standard testing, testing out of the box. The idea there is like offline testing, brick and mortar testing, kiosks, server side, and our guests will be, let's see, there's 4 of them. I don't want to miss anybody. We've got Gary Angel of Digital Mortar. We've got Chad Sanderson now at Microsoft, Anthony Tang at Walmart Labs, and Jason McGovern at Vanguard. So come see us next time. Thanks, everybody.
Great. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.